everyone. I am back with another edition of the Fire Future in Review podcast. I'm here today with Evan Anderson, who is the CEO of Invent IP, which fights nation-sponsored intellectual property theft. And for those of you who don't know me, who haven't seen the podcast before, my name is Barrett Anderson. I'm the COO of Strategic News Service and Future in Review. So we're here today to talk about a fundraiser that Evan has been organizing, which will be taking place on Sunday in Seattle. Evan, what are the time details of the?
Yeah, so we'll be showing a film in partnership with SIF, and thank you to SIF for that, at the Egyptian Theater on Capitol Hill. If you're a Seattle area resident, you probably know it. And that will be at 6 p.m. on Sunday, June 19th.
So tell me a little bit more about why you're organizing this fundraiser. Clearly, everyone knows there is an ongoing war in Ukraine. Russia has invaded and continues to do so. But what's going on there now that makes the timing of this so important?
Yeah, so I think if we start with a really broad stroke, it's very clear that the Russian invasion of Ukraine, or the re-invasion is better wording, actually, of Ukraine, marks a turning point in Putin's willingness to just blatantly full-scale land invade a democratic nation, a neighboring nation. And so that's a critical moment in modern history. I think people probably recognize that. Right now, we're also at a critical moment in a very similar way of the actual war. And we've kind of gone through a couple story arcs, right? So early on, Russian troops were pouring across the border. A lot of analysts had kind of expected the Ukrainians to fall quickly, not be as prepared as they turned out to be, and instead they fought like lions, right? So they pushed back huge columns of armored troops from Kiev, defended the capital. And that first stage of the war was a very exciting one, and in the news cycle to people it was new, right? And so they were kind of captivated by it, I think. And I'm sensing a little bit of, and particularly in certain European nations, a little bit of a lack of resolve now as things wear on. So we've entered a time period now where the fighting is brutal. The Russians have brought in a lot of artillery. It's starting to look a lot more like the pockmarked fields of Flanders than it did, individual unit actions where javelins were coming in extremely handy, tanks were in crowded cities. That was a very advantageous situation. Now the war has gotten very difficult for Ukraine, and I think that we're at a point now where this is a country that's on the front lines of democracy, and so to stand and pretend that that's not what's happening, and that we're not looking at the future of Europe for the next 50 years, swinging on what we do here would be silly. And so if we do not continue to support Ukraine and the military in Ukraine, we're going to have a very clear signal sent to a very bad man, right, with very obvious intentions, that it is okay to keep chopping up pieces of countries and stealing them wholesale. And that's not the kind of future we want to see for the world. It's not the kind of future we want to see for Europe. And so I think it's just at a time when people may be feeling that their energy for paying attention, for donating, for national governments to offer more tools, weaponry, whatever it is, should be accelerating as the combat accelerates and the Russians bring in reinforcements. I'm worried that people will not do that, and that would be a grave error, not just in this localized instance of foreign policy, but in sending that signal to Putin that it's okay to just chop up pieces of Europe and steal them. And he's talking that way now. So all you really have to do is listen to Russia's government if you want to know what they intend to do. And they've completely abandoned the already silly pretext that NATO expansion was why they were attacking an entire country. And now they're just talking about the era of Peter the Great and invading Sweden and Estonia and you name it. So I think they're hearing that signal now. In the words of people like Macron and Olaf Scholz in Germany, they're hearing that perhaps people would be okay with just simply allowing or rather forcing Ukraine to cede territory, and that's very silly. So we're at a critical juncture here, and we need to do obviously the exact opposite so that we stabilize Europe rather than destabilize it for 50 years.
Right. So I think what you said something to me earlier that really stuck out, which is we have the United States. You and I are both from the U.S.
Yeah.
The United States has for many years done kind of the bare minimum in dealing with Putin and its incursions into foreign lands, right? We've been like, okay, we're going to give you a light tap on the wrist, but we're not going to really do anything to stop
Yeah,
it.
It was insufficient. The responses were insufficient. The response was insufficient in the invasion of Georgia in 2008. It was insufficient, right off the bat when it came to Crimea. And I think a lot of people knew that. It wasn't necessarily, agreed upon across the Western world that, the sanctions packages that were handed out then were fully effective or even enough. But there was just kind of a lack of resolve, and luckily we've seen that change, so that there is much more resolve now. But it needs to be resolve that lasts, or it won't be worth much.
So, okay, so here we are. We're at a critical juncture in what will happen going forward with Ukraine and Russia, and how emboldened or just like, I guess, deterred, right, Putin might be based on actions from the rest of the world. And so tell me about the film that you are planning on showing this Sunday, Winter on Fire, and why it matters. How is it relevant?
So people will probably notice that the film is not a new film. The film, I believe, came out in 2014, and there's a reason for that, and there's a reason that we are showing it. So Evgeny, the director, Evgeny Afineevsky, did a very good job in that film of offering what I would call both heartbreaking and extremely inspiring coverage of what was taking place then, which is actually when the real Russian invasion began. And I think people forget that. So that's why I mentioned re-invasion earlier. The invasion did not start in February. That was the latest version of the invasion, and the earliest version really came in, shortly after what Evgeny covered. So there were the Maidan protests. People probably kind of remember that time vaguely at this point. It was a while ago.
Right. I was going to say, for those who don't remember the Maidan protests, can you give us a imagining of what took place?
Yes. So at the time, the Russian backed leader of Ukraine, who was kind of known to have very strong ties to Russia and eventually fled to Russia after this event, Yanukovych, was in power, and there was a vote, and the vote was to join the EU. And that's something that the Ukrainians have been interested in a long time. They consider themselves to be part of Europe, and I think most of Europe considers them to be part of Europe. So they should be allowed to join the EU today as well. But this is an old battle, right? They've been fighting for a long time just to be part of the EU, and they've been bleeding and dying for that privilege. And I think that the film essentially takes us on the journey of these protesters. One of the comments that I most appreciated by someone else who saw the film is, you can't step on these people. If you watch what they do in the streets, just protesting to be part of Europe. Yanukovych, the reason for the protest was that Yanukovych then, kind of hemmed and hawed, did not actually try to become part of Europe. In fact, then became part of, a weird organization of states Putin had created that was not anywhere near as beneficial or of interest to the people, which led to increasing protest, which led to reprisals, brutal reprisals, and increasingly brutal reprisals, and eventually became what was the Maidan Revolution, where he was thrown out of power for doing exactly that. So you have a populace that is both brave and courageous and willing to be shot in the street, literally, unarmed, to become part of Europe. And I think that really helps, the film itself really helps people to understand the spirit of the Ukrainian people, the goals of the Ukrainian people, and sort of, where their heads and their hearts are at when it comes to where they see the future of their country going.
One of my favorite characters in that film, which I say with, kind of heartbreaking reservations, is this young boy who joins the Ukrainian Revolution and is just, at one point, I think all the soldiers around him are like, you need to call your mom and tell her that you love her. Yeah. And that's just, I think one of the most awful and inspiring in a terrible way scenes in a film that I've almost ever seen. Is like this 12-year-old who is prepared to die for his country and has as much courage and as much stamina as any of the other adults around him, really going after what he believes in deeply as a member of, the Ukrainian population.
Yeah, and at that time they were being sniped. The Russians helped send in snipers, and they were just sniping them. They weren't soldiers; they were civilians.
Yeah,
And they were just willing to stand in the street with plywood shields, just for the belief that they should be included in Europe and allowed to be free.
Yeah.
And I think I think that's I agree. I think that's one of the most powerful moments. I mean, imagine, right? That kid is now of military service age. So his whole adult life has been focused on fighting for freedom from oppression by the Russian government, which is sort of mind-boggling in the modern era. But I think that there's no better example of what we would espouse normally as Western values, right? So if you're not ready to stand up for that kind of thing, for people's right to
self-determination, independence, democracy,
people's right to self-determination, then there's not much to be said, except these days, you would say, in this country, you'd say, well, that sounds un-American if you're not willing to support that, right? Those are American values traditionally. So
okay, so this film that you're showing on Sunday, the director Evgeny is personally attending.
Yes.
He will be there in person.
Yes, we're very excited. We're very glad he's coming up. He's just returned from Ukraine. I can't imagine how tired and exhausted he probably is, and he's still willing to come up. And he will be, I'm sure, giving people some really interesting updates. It'll be fantastic to have him for an in-person Q&A. So please join us for that. That will be fantastic.
And tell me what for people who attend the showing in person, what are you raising money for? Like which specific organizations are you raising money for, and why?
So we're raising money. We're actually working with a group that does a number of other things called Razom, but they are actually helping us host the event at Fire Films, so is SIF. And what we're raising money for is an organization in Washington State that I think doesn't get enough attention. It's the Ukrainian American Association of Washington, and they've been working on some really great projects and desperately need help. One of the things that's most inspiring about the project that we're trying to raise money for is that I think it's both harsh but beautiful in that I did not expect it. And so when we talked to them about what their latest project was, what they wanted to raise money for, they were telling me things that I hadn't even heard. For instance, the number of hospitals that had been hit by Russian strikes is huge. And the number of people that are now giving premature birth in Ukraine is huge. I think someone said maybe over 50% of births are premature. And I wouldn't have thought of that, but it makes sense because these are people who are, in the hospital waiting to have their baby. And then there's an airstrike, and they're running down the stairs into a basement and sitting there while the bombs go off above. It's like the Blitz, right? And so the premature birth rate is skyrocketing at the same time that many hospitals have been hit. One of the most famous images to come out of the war that people may remember is an image of a woman wandering out of a maternity ward, bleeding.
Yes.
And so these guys are doing really good work. The Ukrainian American Association is doing really good work trying to raise money for incubators to replace incubators most likely that have been destroyed so that some of these premature kids have a chance. And I think that, whatever your values are, you could be a Buddhist and that would still be a really, really worthy cause.
So last question, which is, many of our viewers may or may not be located in Seattle proper.
Yes.
How can people donate to the cause, even if they are not able to attend the event?
Yeah, for any of you who are out and about, you can do a number of different things. You can go to the Ukrainian American Association in your local area. You can donate to this project through the Association of Washington. We will use the QR code in the event description. So if you want to register, we'll put the link to register. That's by donation as well. But we're hoping to raise a lot of money at the event as well. And then if you can't make it, that's okay. We're all busy. Lots of things are happening. So just please donate. We'll put the QR code in there for you, and every dollar will count. So
you have a QR code that is on the Eventbrite registration page. Am I getting that correctly?
Yeah, we'll put it in this description of this video as well. It's easy to do. Okay. Yep.
All right, so we will put the link to donate and to register for the event in the description for this video podcast. Evan, I want to say thank you for all the work that you have done and are doing to organize this event. I know it's been kind of a personal labor of love for you, and I think it's really important. I'm very proud to be both your coworker and your sister. I will sadly be out of town on Sunday, but if I were there, I would be there in a heartbeat. And I'm jealous that I don't get to meet Evgeny again. He's an amazing person, an amazing filmmaker, and this is an incredible film. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk about it with me.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. And I want to thank Razom, which is helping us co-host it. They do great work as well. And SIF, which is helping to host it as well.
Buy a ticket, donate money, please.
Please.
Democracy depends on you.